Hi everybody, and yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, I think Francis was saying, I've forgotten more about accessibility than most people, but we're always learning new things. And I mean, even the talk today with Jared was really informative and giving me ways to think about how we can implement accessibility and make it infused. Throughout my talk, I'll probably talk more about embedding accessibility, but I think the term infused is a really good one. So I guess to talk about accessibility and user experience, if you've ever tried to use a mobile phone on a moving train, or if you've ever tried to watch a video in a noisy office, chances are that your user experience of that digital feature would have been influenced by whether it was designed with accessibility in mind. Now, accessibility is often associated with people with disability, and that's vital given the number of people that we might otherwise exclude. 1 in 5 people generally have some form of disability, and we know that the disposable income of people with disabilities, which is often referred to as the purple pound, is in the region of about $1 trillion. So it's not a small market. However, if we design for difference, we also accommodate people in situational and temporary situations where they might be impaired by the situation that they're in. So imagine how would somebody use a mobile device if they're vision impaired? And how would somebody use the device in the same way if they were in bright sunlight or in somewhere where the visibility was poor? In the same way, how would somebody use a slider, for example, on an app, as opposed if they had a mobility impairment, as opposed to somebody else who would try to do that if they were holding a baby in one arm and trying to juggle the phone using one hand. So thinking about accessibility saves time, money, energy, and if we consider it early, provides a much greater user experience. So obviously we're talking about user experience here now. The slides I've got here is Peter Morville's factors of user experience, the 7 factors of user experience. So we can see throughout them, obviously, if it's useful, if it has a use and fulfills its purpose, the user experience would be a good one. If it's usable, so if I can easily get to the information that I'm trying to and efficiently get to that information, then my experience of that service is improved. Also, if I've tried to find that information, is it easy, first of all, to find the application or the service, and is it easy to find the information within that? That'll improve my user experience. And of course, if I get to that information, is it something that I can trust? Is the information credible? And does it improve or provide value for me as a user? And then, of course, there's one element of desirability that's also quite useful. It sort of gives bragging rights. If I've got a cool app, I can brag to my friends about it, and that often makes the experience a lot better. Now, obviously, and last but not least, is accessibility. Now, accessibility means ensuring that our services and our systems are usable for everyone, especially for people with disabilities. And if it's done well, it improves brand, it mitigates risk, it creates more engaged colleagues, and provides a better user experience for all. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't see accessibility as important. And if we're looking at those 7 factors, normally accessibility is the one that gets lost in the mix somewhere. And I think some of the discussions we have, and especially in terms of UX, you have user experience sessions or user testing, but quite often there's not an element of somebody with some form of disability who's included within those testing sessions. Now, one of the reasons that happens is probably because companies might see it as it's not worth spending the money on accessibility because of the low numbers of people who have a disability, statistically speaking. However, when we think about it, as I said, 1 in 5 relates to about 20% of your market, and that's not a small amount. So, and also if we design for accessibility, we improve the experience for all because of the way it makes us think about how we design things. One thing we also have to bear in mind is that accessibility is a legal requirement in many jurisdictions. So if we aren't compliant, we're likely to face fines. However, what we find is that a lot of that legislation often isn't enforced as well as it should be. So when we're talking about changing the mindset of an organization, probably when you're talking about legal compliance, it's probably not probably the place to start. If you wanted to make people or reframe how you talk about accessibility in a way that it's not something that you have to do, you know, because it's a legal requirement, but it's getting people to think about it differently so that they want to do it. So we embarked on a bit of an exercise to try and find ways in which we could talk about accessibility differently. And we came across the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which sort of pointed us in the right direction and making us think about disability or accessibility slightly differently. So when you think about accessibility, it's not only to do with people with disabilities. We're all disabled in certain circumstances or contexts. And what we have to realize is that accessibility is about people. So we have varying scales of ability in how we can access things, and when we consider all of those things, including people with disabilities, we create a better user experience. So our mission at the time was to look at how we could reframe accessibility in a way using the concepts that we learned from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit and communicate that to our colleagues. So what I'm going to do is just go into a bit more detail about how we can look at or see accessibility differently or disability differently, and then I'll go into some of the aspects of how we're trying to integrate that throughout our organization. So the World Health Organization's definition of disability is a mismatch between in the interaction between the features of a person's body and the features of the environment in which they live. So if we look at that, it's our responsibility to be able to look at the interactions that we're creating and to be able to study the mismatches that are occurring. And at those points of exclusion, that's normally the place where you're likely to find innovation. So when we look at accessibility or disability as something that is context or circumstantial, so it depends on where you're in, and as opposed to something that's a personal attribute, then we start to think inclusively. So it's all going well, and what I'd like to do is just go into that a bit more to talk about how we can think about things differently. So there are three types of impairment groups that we're talking about here. So the first that we need to design for are impairment groups where the impairment is permanent. So in the example we've got here, we have somebody with a disability, as you would normally refer to it, and that affects somebody throughout their life. And then the example we've got here is somebody with a lower arm amputation. The second one is somebody with a temporary impairment. So this is something that can affect somebody between 6 to 12 months, and it's normally classed as an injury. And in the example here, we've got somebody with a broken arm. And then the third is situational impairments. So when we talk about situational impairments, we're talking about a situation where it makes it difficult or impossible to complete a task due to the situation that you're in. So the example that we've got here is a mother holding a baby in one arm, in her dominant arm. So it makes the other arm the one that she has to try and use. So this one becomes incapacitated because she's holding the baby, and that's the situation that we're in. So as we can see, with all three of these, it's pretty much the same requirement. So if we're designing for somebody with a lower arm amputation, we're helping somebody with a broken arm, and we're also helping somebody who may be in a situation where they can only use one arm. So thinking about accessibility in that way might make you think about the way you design things a bit differently. So these are just a few more examples from the Inclusive Design Toolkit. And we've covered the first one. So the second one is to do with vision. So if we create or at least have requirements for somebody with a vision impairment. We're helping somebody who may have cataracts, or it might benefit somebody who's a distracted driver. Then we have, if we design for people with hearing impairments, we also help people who may have an ear infection, or somebody in a noisy environment. And then lastly, if we design or consider the requirements for somebody who finds it difficult to communicate via speech, we are also factoring in or helping people who have, say, laryngitis, or somebody who communicates with a strong accent. So it's looking at accessibility in that way is a good idea. And one other thing, when you look at disability and accessibility, is assistive technology, as we refer to it. So things that help us overcome experiences that didn't meet our requirements. So that's what we find with a lot of assistive technology. So people will adapt to situations that don't suit their needs. So some examples here are, say, the typewriter, which was invented in the 1800s to help the inventor's sister communicate or to be able to write. So, and we find nowadays it's basically the standard format for everything in the way that we communicate using text. So what we find is that assistive technology provides indicators of innovation going forward. So if we understand the adaptations that people with disabilities make to try and overcome certain situations, it might point us in the right direction into looking at ways that we can innovate and maybe try something different when we come to design. And then just moving on to today, we have predictive text, which was originally developed for to help people with cognitive impairments or dexterity impairments be able to complete words without having to know the spelling of things and so on. And it's ubiquitous now. When you're typing, it's often quite frustrating when you've written something and it sends it, oh, that wasn't what I meant to say, or whatever. But it's something that's really helped people, and it helps everybody, not just those people that it was originally built for. Then moving on, we have voice recognition, which was developed in the 1950s to help people with mobility impairments control computer systems. And now today we have conversational interfaces like Siri and Alexa, where we can just talk to something and it'll do it. And that's like wow, but that's been in place for people with disabilities since the 1950s. So just going back to the 7 factors of user experience, we can see in this example we have 2 tools that do the same job. The one might be accessible, you can use it, you can peel a potato, but the other one provides a much greater user experience. So what we're saying is that you need to include accessibility as part of the entire user experience studies that you would do when you are designing something. So it shouldn't be left as an afterthought or considered at the end of a project or something. So the earlier you consider accessibility, the better it's going to be. So you've factored in those things, you've looked at the edge cases, and it's informed how you improve your design. So moving on to Barclays. So we've got all this wonderful information, we've reframed how we think about accessibility, but now what our mission was then to communicate this to our colleagues and to embark on a culture change within the organization. And I know that Jared was talking about it today and just saying, like, when he said it's going to take, 17 years, I think it was. We're only 5 years into it, so we've still got 11 years to go. So we're trying our best, and what I'm going to talk about is ways that we are trying to get people to basically a conscious competence, as Jared was saying. So obviously the focus is to move our colleagues from, say, a must-do compliance thing to an opportunity-driven want-to way of thinking. So one of the first things we had to do was define exactly what accessibility means at Barclays. Now, there's often some confusion about accessibility when you're talking technical terms. So they'll say, well, is it to do with access management or resilience or something like that? And we had to say, no, this is to do with making systems better for people with disabilities. And then our definition eventually became to try and make it as simple as possible It's at Barclays, accessibility means ensuring that everyone can use our products and services or be employed by us. So that is a bold statement, and it sort of ties in with our ambition to become the most accessible FTSE 100 company. Bold ambition, but we need something simple, and that's what we mean when we talk about accessibility. We also added that it's that simple to it, because what we find with a lot of the projects that we deal with, they'll always be looking for exceptions. So they'll say, oh, and Jared even mentioned it, the mythical next release. We'll say, well, this is an accessibility problem, it needs to be fixed now, well, we'll do it in the next release, and that kind of thing. So it's about eliminating the opportunity for exceptions. So it's all good and well having all of this, but then what do we do to get people to start thinking about accessibility differently? We know that most of our colleagues, when we talk to them, they want to do the right thing. But what you'll find, especially within Barclays, it's a highly focused and delivery-focused organization. So when you talk about accessibility, quite often it's like, oh, you're giving me another requirement now. So it's another thing I have to do. So it's trying to get the mindset to change. And we know that our colleagues want to do the right thing, but I think we have to do a better job in communicating that and making it real for them. So a lot of the things that I'll be talking about is what we are in the process of doing at the moment to try and change that thinking. So our approach was to do with three sort of strategies, if you want to call it that. So the first thing was to get people to, feel differently about accessibility. So it's about inspiring them, creating empathy with people with disabilities, and understanding the impact that inaccessible systems have on certain individuals. The second one is about enabling hands, or at least educating heads. So this is about removing many of the misconceptions that people have relating to accessibility. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but I think it's that misconceptions that people have that hold back things quite often. And then lastly, it's about enabling hands. So if you've got people to start feeling differently, to start thinking differently, we need to get them to start acting differently. So providing the tools and the resources to get them to a point of conscious competence. So firstly, inspiring hearts. So what we had to do then was, there are a number of things that we've done, and I'll go into some of the examples in a minute, but basically what we were trying to do is to get people to have empathy with people with disabilities, to get them to understand the impact of, say, poor design on somebody with a vision impairment, say low contrast on somebody who has moderate vision impairments, dyslexia and all those kind of things, to get them to start thinking about that and saying, okay, well, if I design this, will it impact that particular group of users? So one thing that we did was run empathy labs. And now empathy is a common approach, and I know Jared was saying that, empathy is the best way to generate empathy is to actually spend time with people, to understand their requirements, and then to observe what they do in their everyday lives. However, with an organization as large as Barclays, and trying to get it to as many people as possible, that's not always possible. I think if we can get most of the sweeper poopers to go to one of those sessions as much as possible, then it's likely to make a change. And we have fairly engaged senior executives. We ran a session a couple of years ago called Living in Our Customers' World, and we got all of our senior execs in, and we got them to speak to people with disabilities, to basically discuss with them some of the issues that they were having with our services, and it had an amazing impact. We've done similar sessions with designers, but those things we can only do on we can only do it on an ad hoc basis. So having something that's consistent and scalable across a larger organization, we have to start thinking in different ways. So empathy labs work really well for that. What we do is we set up a session. We have various simulation kits. So we've got some simulation gloves that mimic arthritis. You've got glasses that will give you an idea of how various vision impairments will affect somebody. We also go to the point of having some augmented reality apps that you can use through a Google Cardboard to see how somebody with color blindness observes the world. We're even working on a virtual reality environment to give users the empathy with somebody with a vision impairment trying to navigate a branch, for example. So we're doing quite a lot of things, and it's something that we're trying to scale up a lot more. And we found these to be fairly successful because they're quite easy to set up, and all we do is we get people to come throughout the day at any time and just have a look at some of the tools that we're providing. And the point of it is not to, there is the concern that empathy, or at least simulations, don't really come across as the real experience that somebody with a disability has. But it's more to get designers and developers to start thinking differently about accessibility and to basically understand the impact of what they're doing, and then maybe explore a bit more so maybe going to a user testing session to see people actually using their systems and struggling with them, if that's the case. So one of the things that I know that Jared classed these as empathy filters, which they are, but it's still something to get people to start thinking, maybe have a light bulb moment to say, I didn't realize that was an issue that somebody had. I might be able to do something about that. So we have a portal with videos that sort of give us insights into how certain people, colleagues, customers with disabilities experience the services that we have on a day-to-day basis. So the next thing is educating heads. Now, I'm sure if you are in accessibility, you'd have heard these many times. So I'll just read through them. So users don't complain about accessibility, we must be doing okay. So these are the kind of misconceptions that we hear a lot from people who aren't educated in accessibility. They'll say, I'm not a developer, accessibility is not my job. Accessible sites and apps are boring. I know we hear that from designers, and we'll come to that in a bit. Few people benefit from accessibility. And then accessibility is expensive. So these misconceptions, we had to try and address these. So what we did was we created a number of videos, and these are available on YouTube as well. And we also created posters that we could put up around the place. But basically, it's trying to dispel some of those myths that people have. So if we look at the first one, say users don't complain, what we find is that about 10% of users complain. People with disabilities will complain. 90% of them will just click away. And there's studies that have shown that, and it's called the click away pound, we could be losing, say, about 12 billion pound through people just leaving us and going to different services because they're more accessible. What you'll find is people with disabilities will often think it's their fault that something's not working. So they'll just say, oh, can somebody help me, with this? Or they'll just find something that works a bit better. So that in terms of complaints, it's not always the best gauge when we're talking about accessibility. Second one is accessibility is not my job. Now, as Jared said, I think it's everybody's job. You may have people at different points of maturity within an organization, but it's trying to get people to understand that it's their job as well. So as a senior exec, you'll be going, we need to make sure this is accessible, or I'm not letting this go until it's accessible. It's that kind of thinking. The next thing is fixing accessibility is expensive. It is expensive if you try to address accessibility at the end of a project, because quite often it means you have to start rewriting things and changing things, and that is really expensive. But if you consider accessibility early, you factor in the requirements early on, and then design based on those, you save yourself a lot of money, and you'll have a better product. And then the market is just too small. We have 12.9 million people with disabilities in the UK. That's not a small amount of people. And that broadening your customer base is always a good thing. And then accessible design means boring design. Now, there are creative challenges sometimes when trying to incorporate accessibility into design. However, our mantra has always been, it should work well for those who need it and be invisible to those who don't. So once we've dispelled some of those misconceptions, then we need to, and people are bought in at an emotional level, and then at an intellectual level, then we need to provide them with the tools to be able to create accessible services. So what we have is what we call an Accessibility Academy, and that has a whole bunch of resources. So this is from training for different roles, code libraries for developers, e-learning, face-to-face training that people can go on to improve their knowledge of accessibility. So moving through the spectrum, as Jared would say, so we can get them to a point where, at the very least, we have some competence. Then we have what we call lean accessibility controls. Now, we are now part of the governance process within Barclays. So we can hold up a release. So we are at a point where we can say this isn't going live because it's not accessible. There's obviously some people who still jump up and down about it, but we have the same seat at the table as everybody else. So which is really positive, and it has helped us. It's a bit stick, but hopefully all the other things we can do will encourage people to start thinking a bit differently. But it has had a tremendous impact in the influence that we've been able to have within Barclays. Then we also provide design libraries and patterns, so that we're doing a lot of work now on tying in things like our brand, our design, our style guides, and our component libraries to ensure that developers, designers, and all the various people within a project have the right tools, and we're confident to say, yes, you can use that component because it's been accessibility approved, it meets our style requirements, and it meets our brand requirements. So we provide all of that to the teams, and we're still in the process of trying to encourage them to use it as much as we would want them to, but we are in a sort of transition at the moment, so it's a positive step. And just focus on one of the resources that we do give people is the Inclusive Design Principles. Now, this was developed by the Paciello Group, and we've basically Barclayfied it. So pretty much I can go through each of these. So the first thing is obviously to provide a comparable experience. So that's giving it doesn't have to be an identical experience, but it should be similar in quality to anybody else if you are trying to access any kind of service. Then about giving control. So regardless of how you want to interact with a digital service, you should be able to do that. It should be flexible enough to be able to do that in terms of design. Offer choice. Now, the example here, you can either have, if you're from a design point of view, you can either have a grid, or you can have a list, or you provide different options, like in iOS, where you can select edit. It gives you options where you can select emails and delete them, or you can just swipe across and delete the email. So you're giving the user various options of interaction. And that's always useful because not everybody's going to follow a single path when interacting with things. Then consider the situation. So if you're in bright sunlight, can I see what's going on? And that's probably one of the biggest problems we have because our brand is very washed out. It's white with blue. And trying to get people to start saying, well, maybe we need to make things a bit darker, provide options for people to maybe have a inverse color scheme or something like that, is something that we would need to consider. Then obviously making sure our behaviors and our design, the way interactions work, is consistent with standard interaction methods. And then also prioritizing content, a basic design principle. And then, of course, adding value. So if we're providing some new features, they should add value to the users. So one other thing we do provide as a resource is our diverse personas. We've got a few left on our standard downstairs. Now, personas is commonly used in design, we know that. But funnily enough, there aren't many that deal specifically with people with disabilities. So these personas, and we can see from this example here, is Maya, who has dyslexia. And this just gives us an insight into their daily life. So what their likes and dislikes are, some of the challenges they may have when using online systems or services. So it gives designers an insight so they can have a look at that and say, well, maybe I can think about my design differently because it may affect somebody like Maya. And then one other thing we're working on at the moment is trying to get our designers, and because we've got all the resources, we've got accessible components and design elements, what we're trying to encourage them to do is to annotate their designs as much as possible. So when it gets to the developer, they know exactly, okay, I've got to use that component. This is what I'm expecting in terms of accessibility behavior. So if it's a screen reader announcement, I know exactly what I need to code in to get it to do that. So it's about integrating and infusing accessibility as much as possible. And then, of course, user testing. And I know that Jared focused on this a lot. We always encourage teams to do user testing. So it's always the best way is sitting with people and experiencing what they're experiencing and seeing. That's when the light bulb moments happen. So you'll have a developer who will go and observe a user testing session with diverse user groups. And they'll say, oh man, it's so terrible. I'll have to do something about that. So then, and when they come back, they always are a lot more passionate about accessibility, because it's just, I think it's lack of awareness more than anything else. Because if you don't understand the issues somebody is having, and when you see it actually happening, it has a much greater impact. And just an example here is we have our pin-century devices. So originally they were designed as little devices with little buttons, little screens, and we found that a lot of our customers had issues with that. So we went through a number of iterations, doing user testing on each of them, and we finally came to one that had large buttons, bigger screen. It's a bit more chunky, but it has audio output and all sorts of things. So it was a really good exercise. So some of our achievements. So one thing where we've managed to integrate a lot of the principles that I've been talking about is in our mobile banking app. What we did originally was we got senior buy-in. He basically assigned a project manager, and it was his objective to ensure that we got an app to the point where it was accessibility compliant. We also got our trainers in, and they got the testers and developers to understand accessibility a lot better and how they could code it up. We also got external consultants in to do user testing sessions and then also expert reviews of the application. And then we also did external user testing sessions where we got a range of people with disabilities and tested the app. And all of the feedback from all of those sessions was incorporated into what's referred to as an accreditation list. And that was worked out to get it fixed. And then once that was fixed, it received accreditation, and we've had some amazing feedback on the app. I'll just read this out. So the Barclays applications have improved vastly. When you go to pay someone, you can type the first two letters of whom you want to pay, and it takes you straight to that person. It's become very immediate. Rather than using lots of text, it's more concise and allows you to do what you want quickly and easily. It's brilliant. And then having used the Barclays mobile app for various things at the weekend, I was surprised to realize that I'd been able to do everything I wanted without a hitch. The fact I can view and manage my accounts, make a call to customer services from inside the app, and clear security in one easy step, find out about offers and other products, and do all other things people expect to do with banking app is a genuine pleasure. Thank you. So you can see that feedback, and this is from people with disabilities. But if you actually look deeper into those comments, it's the kind of thing that any user would want. So by improving those things for people with disability, we've immeasurably improved the application for everybody. So some of the other things, so high visibility debit cards, and there's some examples at our stand as well. These are cards that you can customize, so you can take a photograph and get it printed on your debit card. So this sort of give our IT manager, or at least the head of digital accessibility, an idea to say, why don't we give people the option to put a high contrast background on, for example, so they can read the numbers a bit better. So that was sort of the first step. And now you can actually customize your card. So you can say, I want a black background with white text, And for people with more severe vision impairments, you can get an arrow printed on. So when you take your card out of the wallet, you can see which direction it needs to go into the machine. And for people with severe vision impairments, there's a notch that's cut out the back of it, so you can actually feel which side the card needs to go into the ATM. So really good. A small, very simple thing, but it had significant impact. Then the ability to be able to make payments using voice control. That's been added to the mobile banking app, which is good for anybody. So I can just say, yeah, pay somebody £10. But it's even better for somebody who has a mobility impairment or a vision impairment, where they don't have to interact specifically with the app. They can just use their voice to control it and say, do this for me. Now, the BPay bands are something that weren't specifically developed for people with disabilities, but we found it had an amazing impact for people with disabilities. So basically, it's a bracelet with a chip in it, and you can load a set amount of money onto it. So I think the intention was, this before we had Apple Watches and all that kind of stuff that we do now, but the intention was to get people to be able to make payments a lot easier by just having something on your wrist. But what we found is that it's useful for somebody if they want to go out for a night, they can put 30 quid on it or whatever. It costs a lot more than that now, showing my age now. But yeah, so you can go out, put a certain amount of money on the band, and when it's gone, it's gone. But what we found is that it has enormous benefits for people in vulnerable situations. So where a carer can actually put a set amount of money onto the card, and then you have the individual who may be vulnerable to thieves or whatever. It gives them some level of independence, so they can go out and make purchases. And if the band gets stolen, it's only a small amount of money that's gone. So very useful and gives a bit of independence. And then contactless ATMs. Now, this is something that's been in progress for quite a while, and it's available on Android now in branch. So what you can do is because the app has been accessibility accredited, you can go into it, set up a transaction. If just say you use a speech reader on the phone, you can set it up and say, I want £20. And when you select go, it basically gives you 30 seconds. All you have to do is go up to the ATM, tap your phone on the reader, and it'll give you £30 without you having to interact with the kiosk, which can be challenging for certain individuals. And of course, it's easy for any of us. So if we just set it up on the app, it helps us from a security point of view. We don't have to go up there and type a PIN that somebody might actually see. So it has enormous benefits for everybody. So some of the learns based on what I've been speaking about here. So one of the things that we've found is that if you consider accessibility early, you include all the requirements, you start to be able to recognize biases. And that might inform your design. So things like user testing, empathy labs, all that kind of stuff. Then obviously considering accessibility early has enormous benefits because obviously it saves money. It ensures that the product considers accessibility throughout its process. And with our governance processes now, we ensure that our products are accessible before it goes out the door. We also innovate from the edges. So this is basically considering the edge cases. So looking at the requirements for somebody with a disability might create innovation for all users. And then, of course, humanizing the stories. So it's about getting to a point where we feel and empathize with people with disabilities. We understand their requirements. It just doesn't become another requirement. We actually think, I'm trying to help somebody here. And if we understand their stories and observe them and maybe learn from the resources that we provide, we may be able to get to a culture where accessibility is considered as business as usual. So in closing, I'd like to just list some of the manifesto items of the recently released Accessible User Experience Manifesto. So the first thing is it's a challenge to design, but it's a creative challenge, but it's not a challenge to creativity. It's an important aspect of the requirements. It's not a bolt-on that we do. It's not a checklist item. It's something that's integrated as intrinsic value to what we do. And then, of course, it's about people and not technology. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yeah, I think so. There's a few minutes for questions. You'll have to shout. We don't have the mic. Maybe if you repeat the question briefly, that would be great. So yeah, if there are a couple of questions, please fire away.
Hi.
Hi, I'm just interested in your kind of lead accessibility controls. Where do things fit into the process? Are those on your kind of release process or your project management process?
Yeah. What we do is we have what's called control tribes, and if you know how Agile works, you'll have control elements. So you'll have a team that's assigned to a project, and then you'll also have your SMEs. So you'll have somebody from data privacy or security or any of those risk areas will be part of the team, and accessibility is one of those. So we're one of the components of the sort of governance controls. And what we'll do is we'll assign what we call risk stories, but pretty much they're high-level requirements or principles that are based pretty much on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They've got a high-level 12 principles. Our risk stories are based on those, and then we assign them, and then we'll assess the project at given points during the testing process, and we'll decide whether they've met those principles or not. Yeah.
What challenges and opportunities do you think there are when it comes to cognitive disabilities?
Yeah, I think as we saw with predictive text, there's things that help people with cognitive impairments, and that makes it easier for everybody. So I think if we look at, say, something from a cognitive point of view, or ways for example, if we, say, simplify text or make things easier to read, then it's obviously going to improve understanding for a lot of other customers who would come in and say, sometimes, and I think especially with banking, it's full of jargon and acronyms and all that kind of stuff. So if we can eliminate that and make it a lot more simpler to understand, we'll also get people to start using apps. And I mean, if you take, for example, things like Monzo, they've got the user experience down to quite a simplistic approach. And I think if we could do that, we'd also be making for a better user experience. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Hey.
So in the organisation where I work, I've put accessibility at the heart of the designs and the products that we produce, and we've come quite a way. But we also produce a lot of material in the organisation, like standard documents and other designs. How do you get the organisation to improve the accessibility of that?
Well, what we've done as part of the lean process is to include document accessibility as part of the requirements. Yeah. It is challenging, and I'm not saying we've got it right, but because a lot of the systems that we use within Barclays will are difficult to change. To add in, because a lot of the stuff is automatically created. So if you have a statement or whatever, it'll be automatically be created by a system. And trying to change that system is quite challenging. But we're doing a lot of work on our brochureware, documents, some of the statements that we send out, or literature that we'll send out to our customers. We've included it as part of our sort of brand guidelines for, say, documents. It must, for instance, all the colors must be done. You must add headings and all those kind of things. And even our email newsletter systems, we've managed to go through the governance process, and those vendors have incorporated some of the accessibility requirements into how you would create emails for customers and colleagues. So I would say it's always going to be getting executive buy-in, and that's always the hardest thing. If you get somebody who controls those documents, if they buy into it, they'll say, okay, well, we need to fix this. But ideally, it should be part of the requirements for a project. If it's going to use documents, those documents need to be accessible.
Thank you.
Anything else?
One final question? Or zero question?
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.